Okay, welcome back to Speech Talk Live, episode number 49. This is segment number one. And in this segment, we're going to have a discussion around when you're giving a speech, let's say a public speech, the question that always comes up is should you speak fast or slow? Now, by fast, I mean, you're not purposely going to speed it up like you're trying to finish it quickly. Like some people tend to talk fast. And then there are other people who generally tend to talk slow. A lot of times, people who talk fast, they have a problem in a sense that when they're giving a speech, should they speak the same way if it's in front of a large audience, right? And I've seen there are two camps here. One camp says you speak the way you normally do and just pause in a right place, emphasize the words or phrases, and the audience will pick it up. Okay, that's one camp. The other camp is no, that says you have to slow it down because it's very difficult for people to process what you're saying, especially if you are bringing some insight that they need to understand. It's just gets overwhelming. People can't process things that fast. So I thought about this, and I said, wait, let me think about this. And again, this is what I said before. I like to listen to both sides and then come up with my own opinion on something, on my own approach. And I thought about this, and I said, that's true for speaking the normally. Let's say if you're speaking fast, it might be appropriate for certain situations, but it may not be appropriate for other situations. So what I came up with is this. You can speak fast if you are able to see the person can see you. You're very close to the person. That person can pick up a lot from your eyes. I call it the eyeball test. So if they can see you eyeball to eyeball, they can tell. Like there's a lot of communication that they're getting from your facial gestures, your mouth, your eyes, all of that. That's part of your communication. So there, speaking fast, you will get indication quickly if you're losing somebody, and you will slow it down because that person is not able to follow what you're saying. Okay, so when it's a one-on-one or a small group, you'll be able to pick up these hints and you can modulate your pace based on that. Okay, the problem is you can't do that when you're speaking in front of a large audience. You can't see their eyes. You're not going to be able to key in on one person sitting there because a lot of times, depending on what kind of setting it is, people are going to be far away and you can't like just stare at somebody and say, let me see what these eyes are doing. It's just not going to look, it's going to make you look weird. Okay. So the thing to do is just err on the side of slowing it down because, and the other thing that happens is that when you speak slowly, if it's one-on-one, like right now, if I'm speaking to Julie and I suddenly slow it down, Julie, is this making sense to you? Julie's going to get offended, thinking like, wait, why is Jay treating me like I'm some kind of a child here, right? So I'm not saying that's how it would work, but if I slow it down too much, if it's up close, she might get offended. But when it's a large audience, people don't get offended, right? Because they think like, hey, he's talking like that to everybody, so I'm not going to take it personally. So that's what I came up with, this thing called the eyeball test, that if you're not sure, and the problem is that people who speak fast have a difficulty of slowing it down. And the question is, you got to work on that, because if you speak fast in front of a large audience, you're going to start losing people pretty quickly. So that's my approach. That's how I approach this when it comes to speaking fast. And it sounds kind of trivial, but it's not, because if people can't understand you, if people cannot follow you, then your speech essentially becomes kind of like a waste of time. So Julie, you speak quite a bit. So what do you think? Do you ever think about this, whether you should, when you're speaking one-on-one, whether you should speak your normal way, but if you're speaking in front of a larger group, you've given speeches at work, places. Do you even think about this? How do you handle it?
Well, Jay, thank you for bringing this to the forefront of this idea of speed, to the forefront of my attention. And I think in the past, I haven't really thought about it. In speaking to a relatively large group and now practicing with you, I think these are the these are some of the clues that I use. First of all, some people are fast speakers and some people are slow speakers, and we all know who we are. And the question is to get feedback from someone. But here is something I do. I think that we can bring the fast people to slow down and slow people to speed up to a kind of like a more effective range, and that is three things. One is drama. In other words, Seth Godin, as you mentioned, he always says, when you are speaking in a group, you have to up the oomph, dramatize what you're saying, because other people won't experience as you do. So like, as you said, in private, we may talk differently. I try to be louder and more dramatic when I'm on the video. So add drama. By adding drama, you naturally either speed up or slow down. The second thing is breath. Knowing when and where to take a breath helps to set the pace. So someone who is very slow, for example, if he takes a breath in the beginning and then use that breath to moderate the speed, he will naturally come to a more optimal pace. If someone who is speaking very fast, similarly, if they take a breath, that will slow down their rhythm. And also repetition. Repetition is a very great way to both speed up and slow down, because when you say something, if your natural tendency is to be slow, when you repeat it, you're going to pick up the rhythm. So there's a change in the rhythm. You don't want everything to be at the same rhythm. Similarly, if someone's speaking very fast, just the virtue of repetition is slowing the audience's mind down, because they're hearing the same idea again. So repetition is great for pacing and for emphasis. And finally, I think do the opposite to add drama or emphasis. So if I'm naturally a slow speaker, I will speed up to make a point. I'll make it louder and faster. But if I'm a slow speaker, if I'm a fast speaker, when I slow down, you will wonder and pay attention to me. So use the opposite of your natural rhythm for emphasis. And all these tricks, I believe, will add effectiveness to both pacing, drama, and helping your audience to stay tuned to the message. So I hope that's useful to you.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there. I think what you're saying is that you got to use your voice to create change transitions, like create something is changing. You don't want to be speaking in a monotone, because then people don't see a change and they can't react to it. You need a dancing voice. That's what I call it. Like, I listen to some of these motivational speakers, and what I notice when I watch them is how they use their voice. They make it dance. Like, they'll say, like Zig Ziglar. Have you ever listened to him? If you watch his video, look at the way he uses his voice. Like, why does he do that? Like the way he does that, right? And it's like, you really key in on that. Like, there's always this variation that's taking place in his voice. And the other thing I think you mentioned, I do have one question about breathing, because you're an expert on that. You teach, you're a practitioner of yoga, so I have a question on that. But before I go into that, let me point out one thing that you mentioned about the pause. And pauses are very important. And these are things you have to practice. Like once you got your content done, and you have the message, once you have your message, you have your speech, then the last thing you have to practice, and this is the part that, by the way, takes up most of the time, which most people don't even realize, is the delivery. These techniques, some of the things that Julie just mentioned, they take a long time to integrate it into a speech. Like, pause is a very strategic thing. If you pause at a wrong place, the meaning just changed completely. So you can't just say, I'll just pause just to give myself a break. That's not what a pause is for. Pause is for an effect that you want to create. And a purpose of a pause, if you ever look at expert speakers, you can tell if somebody is a good speaker, not by what they're saying, it's where they're pausing. Because a pause is for an effect. And it almost kind of tells you, like, okay, I'm pausing, that somebody said something important, and now what's about to follow is even more important. And that's what a pause, I don't know, that's how I view pause, is that when a pause occurs, people, you're giving our audience to kind of think about what I just said, and then you may want to elaborate that. So now you know, like, hey, something I might have missed it, but because he paused, he's now going to kind of tell me why what he just said was so important, and people start paying attention. And the last thing is this breathing. I never understood, like, when it comes to breathing and speaking. Do you have any kind of exercises, Julie? Uh, like, how do you practice breathing when it comes to as it applies to speaking? Like, we can all like practice deep breathing, but I never understood, like, how do you practice, like how do you integrate that into a speech? Like, where do you breathe? Like, people write down pause here, they underline the words for emphasis, but should you also put somewhere in there when you're practicing, breathe here, breathe here, breathe here? Otherwise, I mean, I just am asking you, have you ever, like...
Yeah, actually, I practice this a lot. Not like stay home and practice for 20 minutes, but I do moderate every month a meeting for our group. And so what I have discovered is most of us don't know when to breathe. So we might forget to breathe, and then in the middle of the sentence, we have to breathe. So a very good basic way to start practicing pacing with breath is always try to take a breath before you start the sentence. And it doesn't have to be a huge breath. It doesn't have to be a belly breath. It could be just your normal breathing, but always practice breathing before you start a sentence. And then take 2 breaths or take a longer breath between paragraphs or between 2 basic ideas, because the pause, as you mentioned, helps to organize and emphasize. But so breathing, when you breathe in, you're taking a pause. So you can take a small pause, like a small break between sentences, and a larger breath or 2 breaths between paragraphs. And that would definitely help you appear and also internally be more organized.
Right. Yeah, because it's not something that I have done, but it's something I should start looking into, as far as once I have put a speech together. Like a pause, obviously you're going to take a breath right there. But at other points, where do you breathe so that your voice kind of remains, because the way you use your voice when you're speaking is very important. Body language, that Morabian study, body language, then comes the voice, and then comes the words. So voice is very important. All right, Julie.
Yeah, I just want to add this point is, if your sentence is so long that it takes you 2 breaths to finish the sentence, then you probably want to break it into 2 sentences. So that's another way nice to use your breath.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. When you're speaking, you really do want to use short sentences, just for what you just said, because in writing, you don't have to breathe. You can just read right along. But when you're speaking, that's why you don't want to speak fast. You want to just make it a short sentences, so that that automatically takes care of your breathing if you do it right. But one thing I have to point out is, these are all things that sound really easy, like, oh, breathing, how tough can that be? We all breathe, like we all walk, we all do all these things. But it does matter as far as how the audience perceives your speech, because you're performing. It's just part of your performance. So breathing may not be something that we think much about when in our daily lives, but when it comes to speaking, it can make a huge difference as far as how well you resonate with your audience. And it is something you do have to practice. All right, Julie, at this point, I'll take a brief pause so we can move on to our next segment. Excellent insight on this. We could talk more about it, but I think at this point, we have to move on to our next segment. So I'm going to take a brief pause.